Darth Vader, formerly the famed Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, was the Sith apprentice to Darth Sidious. The greatest Jedi killer in history, Vader would lead Operation Nightfall and would personally slay several Jedi Masters along with many Knights and Padawans. Vader would then butcher the Separatist Council on Mustafar before being confronted by his old master Obi-Wan Kenobi. After their lengthy duel, he would be soundly defeated, losing all his limbs and being burned alive. Contrary to his master's initial belief, Vader survived his injuries, though not without an extensive cybernetic refit in order to keep him alive. While his cybernetics initially hampered him, Vader would adapt quickly, making what he had work, becoming the enforcer to the newly formed Galactic Empire. He would then lead the Jedi Purge, killing every Jedi he came across until he was finally beaten at the hands of Luke Skywalker. However, Skywalker spared his life, rejecting the dark side of the Force and proclaiming himself a Jedi Knight. Vader would then follow suit, turning his back on the dark side and killing Sidious, resulting in his conversion to the light side and the death of Darth Vader. Born to Han and Leia Organa Solo on Coruscant, Jaina Solo, along with her twin brother Jacen, inherited her father's mechanical aptitude and her mother's Force sensitivity, resulting in her eventual training at the Jedi Paraxium. When the Yuuzhan Vong invaded the galaxy, Solo joined the New Republic military and distinguished herself as a rogue squadron pilot. She was constantly on the front lines of battle during the Yuuzhan Vong War, earning the title of Sword of the Jedi from her uncle, Luke Skywalker, along with the rank of Jedi Knight, and even becoming known as an avatar of the trickster goddess Yun Harla to the Yuuzhan Vong. During the war, the death of her brother Anakin caused Solo to walk dangerously close to the dark side, though would stay her course through the light. As the war raged on, Jaina personally slew War Master Shevong La in the Battle of Ebok. As a survivor of the mission to Myker, Jaina later became joined into the Killik community and was involved in the subsequent Dark Nest crisis and Swarm War on the side of the Killiks against the Chiss Ascendancy in 40 ABY. When her twin brother Jacen Solo fell to the dark side and became the Sith Lord known as Darth Caedus, who plunged the galaxy into war once more, Jaina swallowed her pride and apprenticed herself under the legendary bounty hunter Boba Fett, as a means of acquiring new skills to assassinate Caedus. During a climactic final battle, Jaina would duel her brother in the belly of a Star Destroyer named for their late brother Anakin Solo, resulting in Caedus' death and the end of the Second Galactic Civil War. Following her brother's death, Solo remained an active member of the Order. Jaina joined her uncle in fighting a secret war against both an emerging Sith threat and a dark side entity known as Abeloth, and would rack up numerous Sith kills during the course of the conflict. When the Sith and Abeloth took control of the government on Coruscant, Solo joined her uncle and many of the other Jedi in an infiltration and surprise assault on the occupiers. During the Battle of the Jedi Temple, where Jaina, Cornhorn, and Luke Skywalker held their own against wave after wave of 5,000 Sith, along with Abeloth herself, Jaina would be elevated to the rank of Jedi Master and be appointed to the Jedi High Council for her incredible actions. Following the destruction of Abeloth and the end of the Sith threat, Jaina Solo married the Imperial Jagged Fel, whom she had reconnected with during the Second Galactic Civil War, and while her ultimate fate remains unknown, her descendants would rule the remnants of the Galactic Empire as a new royal family. Hello YouTube, this is the Phoenix Exalt bringing you the next installment of my Versus series. For this analysis, I will be using Darth Vader during the time frame of Return of the Jedi, and Jaina Solo from the time frame of Fate of the Jedi. I will be pulling from Legends continuity along with any canon materials that do not, directly interfere with previously made Legends materials, due to the fact that the Disney Story Group is going in a direction that is neither original nor creative. I will not be using canon as the main point of Star Wars media for my videos. As for the 2008 show Star Wars The Clone Wars, I will be using the episodes, arcs, and tie-in materials for Vader that do not contradict or diminish his feats elsewhere in the Star Wars lore. As always, I own none of the characters, art, music, or other media depicted in this video, and all rights to them go to their respective companies. With that out of the way, I present to you Darth Vader versus Jaina Solo. If these two legendary combatants met on the battlefield, who would be the victor? Darth Vader was a 45-year-old human male at the time of his death, and while his original physical attributes were those of a typical Jedi Knight, as a Sith Lord this was no longer the case. His extensive cybernetic refit left him more machine than man. Most of his internal organs were replaced with cybernetic implants. All of his limbs were prosthetic, and he required a respirator to breathe. Due to the severity of his injuries, the reconstruction was rushed, resulting in the cybernetics being both cumbersome and poorly made. The cybernetics decreased his agility, and the top-heavy nature of his armor threw off his balance. However, Vader quickly adapted to his new body, completely retooling his fighting technique to make all of his disabilities into overwhelming advantages. While his impeded agility would forever remain a weakness, despite his efforts to compensate for the advantages offered by his armor more than made up for the fact. Vader's strength was superhuman, being able to lift and throw a fully grown human with casual ease, and even being able to punch through solid steel with apparently little effort. Additionally, the constant dose of painkillers and other drugs gave him almost unlimited endurance, allowing him to fight in high-intensity lightsaber duels for hours on end without noticeable difficulty. The armor also protected him from injury and other forms of attack. Vader has been stabbed, shot, torched with a flamethrower, survived light hits from a lightsaber, buried alive, exposed to hard vacuum, and withstood a grenade literally exploding in his face. The armor also allowed him to stave off the premature aging brought on by deep immersion in the dark side of the Force, save for the occasional sporting of pale skin and yellow Sith eyes. However, Vader's armor was not without its limitations. Significant blunt force could cause the armor plating to shatter, and a committed strike from a lightsaber would cut through it as easily as anything else. Additionally, Vader's suit was extremely sensitive to electrical discharges. Low-level bursts could cause the armor to seize up, and high-intensity maelstroms could cause the systems to fail outright. While redundant systems built into the armor allowed him to breathe unassisted for a short amount of time, once they failed, he suffocated. Jaina Solo was a 34-year-old human female who stood at just under 4'9" and was still in her physical prime. In terms of fitness and agility, little sets her apart from any other Jedi. However, Jaina's physical endurance was astounding, her best showings being her 2 duels against Darth Caedus and the battle for the Jedi Temple. During her first duel with Caedus, Jaina would receive a severe concussion along with multiple shrapnel wounds and other injuries, but would still be well enough to attempt to continue the fight, along with being able to escape afterwards, though only just. During her second duel with Caedus, she would suffer a stabbing lightsaber wound to the abdomen, a mix of first and second to third degree burns from an impact with an incinerator, a broken ankle, a broken wrist, along with multiple lacerations and other physical blows. Jaina would survive all of these in rapid succession and kill her brother, and would remain conscious long enough to both be rescued and ensure the survival of her comrades. The battle for the Jedi Temple was likely her most impressive display of physical resilience. For 2 days, Jaina, Corran Horn, and Luke Skywalker battled against wave after wave of 5,000 Sith within the Jedi Temple, along with the Force entity known as Abeloth hunting them the entire time. Keep in mind that Abeloth was so powerful that it took the combined mights of both the most powerful Jedi in galactic history, Luke Skywalker, and the second most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history, Darth Vader, to kill her a few days after the battle. During the start of the battle, Solo would receive a leg wound from a grenade blast, multiple blaster shots to her body, one of which hampered her breathing, and over the course of the next 2 days, Jaina would receive a broken arm, multiple broken ribs, along with an unknown amount of other minor injuries. During the last stage of the battle that Jaina would participate in, she was also suffering from Force euphoria, a condition that resulted from drawing on the Force incredibly hard for a prolonged period of time. Luke Skywalker noted that Jaina had been drawing on the Force so heavily for so long that her cells were practically glowing with Force energy, and gave her only a few minutes before she experienced a crash every bit as severe as a drug user coming down from an overdose. Jaina would survive all of this, and just a short while later would be healed enough to rush back into combat against Abeloth for the final confrontation of the now not-so-secret war. This is an easy verdict to call. While it is true that Jaina is in physical prime condition and can withstand a large amount of punishment, she simply cannot stand up to the overwhelming physical might that Vader can bring to bear. Jaina is significantly more agile than Vader, however this is not a significant advantage in a pure hand-to-hand engagement, as Vader has dealt with agile speed fencers in the past. Darth Vader gets the physical edge. Anakin Skywalker was a natural talent with the lightsaber, becoming the reigning master of the Gem-So for his era, proving his mastery by defeating the fallen Jedi turned Sith Lord Count Dooku, who was noted for being the finest duelist in the history of the Jedi Order. With his fall to the dark side and defection to the Sith, these skills would be turned against his former comrades, becoming possibly the greatest Jedi killer in galactic history. Additionally, since almost all of Emperor Palpatine's dark acolytes and Emperor's hands trained under Vader, he had a significant impact on lightsaber dueling during the Dark Times, which was regarded as the heyday for Form 5 to Gem-So. Form 5 was developed to answer the perceived weakness of a lack of offense from Form 3 Surisu, and was built around the tactic of following defensive maneuvers with immediate counters, retaliating against the opponent instead of passively responding to their attacks. In layman's terms, peace through superior firepower. The Xi'an variant was geared towards aim deflection, Gem-So towards lightsaber dueling. Anakin Skywalker mastered both, and this skill transferred to Vader. Learning from his mistakes on Mustafar, Vader did not become a grossly over-specialized Form 5 combatant like Anakin, and instead incorporated the elements from all 7 forms into his techniques, using Gem-So as the backbone for a highly advanced hybrid fighting technique. Vader's technique was also built around defending his vulnerable respirator. He would refine his footwork in order to increase his mobility, but also turned his immobility into an asset. While strength is a major part of his technique, Vader is not some brute with an axe, like Savage or Press, and on more than one occasion has demonstrated that he is perfectly capable of an incredibly precise attacks, no doubt using elements of Form 2 Makashi. His technique being noted as crisp and precise by Oli Starstone on Kashyyyk, Vader became so adept with discerning lightsaber forms that he no longer relied on familiarity with the forms and simply knew each and every move one could use with a form and could recognize and size up an opponent in an instant. Vader primarily developed this skill due to the fact that most Jedi were complete slaves to their preferred fighting forms. Thus, any form, even a basic combination of two forms, became a predictable one. This meant that notable duelists for swordsmen such as Count Dooku, Darth Bane, and Yoda attacking Vader solely through saber combat would practically be suicide. While I'm not saying that Vader would beat any of them in a fight, I am saying that the fact that they solely rely on the forms of lightsaber combat to fight and not creating their own leaves them dangerously exposed to Vader's expertise. Though this reliance on sussing out his opponent's technique gave Vader a massive advantage against almost all opposing swordsmen, this left a huge disadvantage against duelists who had a highly randomized fighting style, with the only consistency being their lack of it. This is why duelists such as Exar Kun, Ko Sendarach, and Rowan Shrine stand a much better chance against Vader than most other swordsmen in the galaxy. All in all, Vader was a highly skilled combatant who could reliably defeat almost every single combatant in his era through preparation and knowledge, but against the few he couldn't prepare for, he was helpless to stop. As an early member of the new Jedi Order, Jaina was likely trained first in the 3 Rings of Defense. Essentially a hybrid of the strong, medium, and fast styles, the 3 Rings of Defense were a simplistic form of combat designed to introduce the students of Luke's Academy to the principles of lightsaber combat. The main difference being that it functioned as one fluid form rather than 3 separate styles. As described by Corran Horn, the style consisted of 3 sets of unique stances and maneuvers that dealt with dueling at various ranges. The outer ring consists of grand sweeping power attacks, the middle ring consisting of short, sharp strikes designed to redirect projectiles, and the inner ring used tight conservative blocks aimed at shunting aside power attacks and parrying a probing offensive. The 3 rings were a tutorial style used by the new Jedi Order, and after their training in it was complete, students were tasked with personalizing their style in whatever way they saw fit. However, by the time of Jaina's mastery, the new Jedi Order had rediscovered the classical forms of lightsaber combat, and even the most obscure and ancient of forms. Corran Horn trained in Quitata, Kyle Katarn and Luke Skywalker mastered all 7, and the newer students would be allowed to study a classical form if they chose to do so. The specifics of Jaina's skill set are not confirmed in any source, though based on a description of her fighting style, an educated guess can be made. While dueling her brother for the first time, he described her fighting style as conservative, brutal, ruthless, designed to deal damage without suffering any in return, and nothing like Kaitis had ever seen before. Nor was it taught at Praxium on Yavin 4. During Jaina's opening moves in the battle for the Jedi Temple, she would describe herself as chaos, letting the battle flow through her and allowing her to fully lose herself to the fight. Additionally, it can be seen that Jaina fully integrates both the Force and physical combat into her lightsaber sequences. The conclusion I have reached is that Jaina was a master of Form 7, Juyo. Juyo was described as the most vicious form of lightsaber combat, and was said to be filled with both fury and malignant grace. Appropriately labeled the ferocity form, the style was both chaotic and erratic, with a heavy focus on offense. As the most aggressive form of lightsaber combat, the standard prerequisite to Juyo is mastery of 2 other forms of lightsaber combat. This results in no 2 applications of Juyo being the same, as every practitioner is going in with completely different skill sets and backgrounds. I believe that the 2 other forms that Jaina mastered were Form 1, Shicho, and Form 4, Ataru, a form of combatant that predicted lightsabers themselves. Form 1 lightsaber combat was wild and raw, relying on deliberate tactics and being primarily attuned towards losing yourself in the currents of the Force, and in the hands of a master, Shi-Cho was fluid but highly randomized and unpredictable. Shi-Cho was specialized towards engaging multiple opponents, the wide sweeping motions being ideally suited towards attacking numerous adversaries. However, Form 1 was not as useful against single opponents, as the wide motions became clumsy in single combat. Jaina compensated for this with the study of Form 4. Form 4 was the most acrobatic and physically demanding of all the classical forms of lightsaber combat, categorized by both wild flourishes and acrobatics, along with the fluid integration of physical combat into lightsaber sequences. Jaina has been shown employing Force-assisted acrobatics on numerous occasions, along with heavily utilizing the integration of physical combat techniques into her lightsaber sequences. While usually a practitioner of Form 7 is considered strong in a saber duel, but weak to Force attacks, Jaina seems to have partially transcended this weakness. When Darth Vader attempted to use the Force to turn her head around on her shoulders, she used her acrobatic skill to turn the motion into a spinning kick. Additionally, Jaina enhanced her lightsaber technique with Mandalorian physical combat, learned from the likes of Boba Fett and Goran Bevan. These fed into her style and allowed her to achieve the proper mindset to both thoroughly lose herself to the fight while keeping her head and allowing her to make sound tactical decisions in the midst of a chaotic battlefield engagement. As for Jaina's feats, she personally slew Yuuzhan Vong Warmaster Shevong La in single combat, defeated Darth Vader in both of their duels, and killed numerous Lost Tribe of the Sith members over the course of the Secret War, notably killing 3 dark-side-boosted elite Sith sabers on Dromund Kaas without suffering a single injury, along with her multiple Sith kills during the previously mentioned battle for the Jedi Temple. While Jaina may not look particularly imposing, she was certainly not a combatant to be trifled with. Alright, this verdict might get a little controversial, but hear me out. It is a known fact that Darth Vader was one of the best Jedi killers in galactic history. However, Vader was geared towards a very specific sort of Jedi, the Jedi of the Old Order around the time of the Clone Wars. These Jedi that managed to survive Order 66 were very proficient in their chosen forms of combat. However, the vast majority of them were only proficient in their chosen form of combat. The typical Jedi mastered one of the 7 forms, and left it at that. Even a majority of the masters could be counted on in having one style mastered and maybe a loose familiarity with a few others. Only the true masters of saber combat of the era could be expected to have achieved mastery of more than one style, or have mastery of an unconventional and/or personalized style. The reason that I bring this up, it is those masters with unconventional styles that Vader has the most trouble with. Against Rowan Shrine, Vader had some difficulty, even though he should have been far out of Shrine's league. Against Anya Kuro, Vader was nearly killed, which is especially notable considering he was given prep time for that fight. It is a notable flaw with all pattern recognition duelists such as Vader, that when there is no pattern to discern, or it is an unfamiliar pattern, then they are put on the back foot. This is not a slight against Vader. In fact, it is praise, as only a duelist as intelligent as Vader would recognize that he would almost always be up against duelists that fell into a pattern, and so gearing himself towards exploiting that was a smart tactical duel, and served him well. However, when he was placed on the back foot by the likes of Rowan Shrine and Anya Kuro, he could also count on his Force abilities to bail him out. However, for this verdict, Vader does not have access to his Force abilities, and so must rely purely on his skill set. And unfortunately, a hyper-personalized combatant is exactly the sort of duelist that Vader is up against. Jaina starts off by having a highly personalized style that draws from mastery of 4 forms of lightsaber combat, one of which that was not invented until years after Vader's death, along with Mandalorian saber and unarmed combat techniques. Additionally, Jaina's style has been described on more than one occasion as being completely unpredictable, and even a noted duelist such as Darth Vader found it completely unrecognizable from any form of combat that he had studied. For these reasons, I do not believe that Vader could get an edge over Jaina, but by that same margin, I don't see Jaina overcoming Vader through saber skills alone. Jaina operates as an all-around combatant, using every tool at her disposal, whether they are blasters, grenades, armor, Beskar sabers, or force abilities. She is not, however, geared towards pure saber combat, and almost all of her major victories and feats came with the usage of either an alternative weapon set or force abilities. It is for this reason that while Vader could not overcome Jaina due to his competence, Jaina could not overcome Vader due to her competence, and ensuring that she would not become an over-specialized combatant. Therefore, I declare Darth Vader and Jaina Solo equals in martial arts and lightsaber dueling. Darth Vader's development as a combative force wielder is similar to Ludwig von Beethoven's development as a composer after losing his hearing. Anakin Skywalker had the potential to become the most powerful force wielder in galactic history. However, due to his preference for lightsaber dueling over his force abilities, this potential was never even close to realized. Additionally, his injuries on Mustafar, and due to the fact that the Force is channeled to the living tissue, his potential has been crippled. Despite this, Vader made what he had work, becoming one of the most powerful Force wielders of his era. Vader's application of physical augmentation was focused on compensating for the deficiency of his armor, elevating his speed and agility to make him mobile, and on more than one occasion has been described as moving faster than the eye could perceive. While his cybernetic limbs already possessed enough strength to break bones and crush lightsaber hilts, his boosted strength was capable of ripping doors off of spacecraft. Darth Vader was also an expert at telekinesis, using this power frequently and with little to no effort. He would use pushes and pulls to manhandle targets, and would also be a master of the saber throw, telekinetically moving his lightsaber to hit one or multiple targets with ease, along with using loose objects to pummel his adversaries into submission. Vader also mastered the Force repulse ability, gathering the Force within himself and releasing it in all directions. While grand-scale manipulations were not his typical MO, Vader was more than capable of performing them. He has been observed lifting and crushing AT-AT walkers with telekinesis, destroying armies with devastating force waves, and has even forced two large freighters to collide with one another. One of Vader's best-known usages of the Force was force-based strangulation, crushing the throats of one or multiple targets, and on one occasion crushing the heart of a Jedi. Though a clear emphasis was placed on brute force, Vader was also adept at using precision-based manipulations to undermine his adversaries and assert his control over the fight, and on numerous occasions has successfully penetrated the barriers of opposing Force wielders. Vader's own barriers were also proven to be effective against all but the most powerful of assailants. Vader was also a highly skilled telepath, performing the basic mind trick, beast control ability, and even probing the finds of other trained Force wielders. The most notable example of this is when he successfully probed the mind of his son, Luke Skywalker, and learned the existence of his sister Leia. When under the influence of extreme rage, Vader was capable of surviving otherwise fatal injuries, essentially willing himself to continue living. It was the use of this power that allowed him to survive on Mustafar, and being buried alive during the invasion of the Atuan system, surviving for days with all of his life support systems rendered inoperable. When questioned by Palpatine on how he managed to survive, his response was, "The dark side gave me all I needed." While this is a very impressive power, Vader was only able to consciously control it for 10 minutes at a time, and would otherwise only be used during extremely circumstantial moments. Vader's biggest weakness was his inability to conjure Force Lightning. Due to the fact that Force Lightning can only be cast by a flesh and blood hand, Vader was incapable of generating any form of it. Additionally, Vader was also adept at the Tuta Menace ability. Being able to deflect blaster bolts with ease through Force Lightning was beyond his reach, however. While Vader did not possess a huge bag of abilities to use in combat, the abilities he did have at his disposal were best described with one word: devastating. As the daughter of Leia Organa Solo, and the granddaughter of the Chosen One, Jaina Solo possessed a powerful connection to the Force. As with any Jedi of her power level, Jaina was a master of physical augmentation, using it to boost her strength, speed, stamina, and reflexes to superhuman levels. As a young girl, Jaina was shown being capable of producing light by rubbing air molecules together with the Force. Additionally, Jaina was capable of the Beast Control ability, along with basic Jedi mind tricks, control breath, purging toxins from her body, healing trances, and the memory rub ability. As a field agent, she would be taught the Shutdown ability by Ben Skywalker. The ability allowed one to cut themselves off from the Force whenever they chose, and when Jaina was in this state, she was unable to use the Force, she was completely undetectable by any Force user. While it is true that Luke Skywalker was able to advance this practice to the point that he could selectively choose who could sense him in the Force, along with being able to use the Force while in this state, I believe that this was more of a showing of Luke Skywalker's ridiculous power level, rather than any deficiency on Jaina's part. Moving on to combative abilities, Jaina was a master of telekinesis, using it to casually ragdoll humanoids along with reliably penetrating the barriers of opposing Force wielders. During her first duel with Darth Vader, she sent a blast his way that was so powerful it sent Vader not over, but through the rows of seats. Jaina was also somewhat capable of Force Lightning, discovering her aptitude with this power during her unstable mental state that resulted from watching her brother Anakin die and believing her other brother Jason to be dead. While not depicted using the Force power since the New Jedi Order book series, given that multiple other members of the New Jedi Order are masters of the power, I find it likely that she could still draw on the power if necessary. Lastly, Jaina has also had access to the Shatterpoint ability, using the Force to perceive the fault lines of the galaxy, and she has used it both as a tool of mobility on the battlefield by destroying doors and walls, along with practicing its usage against armored adversaries. As for its usage against opposing combatants, it is unknown if Jaina has advanced the practice that far yet, as she was not and likely never will be featured in single combat again after her final duel against Kaidos. However, I find it likely that this was the case considering she was learning from Luke Skywalker. All in all, Jaina Solo was nothing short of the perfect example of a powerful Jedi who was just beginning her career as a Jedi Master. Some canceling out should be done before we get into the meat of my argument. Physical augmentation simply feeds into the previous category and will be discounted. Any and all abilities that are non-combative are also discarded. While Vader's ability to will himself to stay alive is impressive, him having to use it would imply that he had lost the duel. Both Vader and Jaina do not have access to abilities that were given to them through boosts in power, and so there will be no energy or magic for Vader. Neither have access to poisons, and so cleansing powers will not come into play. The first thing that probably should be discussed is power level. Usually, Vader has the advantage of utterly outclassing his adversary in terms of power, but in this case, not so much. Jaina is of Vader's blood, and while hers is slightly more diluted than her cousin Ben Skywalker, she is certainly not crippled. Jaina's power in the Force has been described as equal to that of her twin brother Darth Vader. Assuming this is accurate, that would make her either the second or third most powerful Jedi of her day, depending on where you put her in relation to Kip Duran. In either case, even a conservative estimate of her relative potential puts her ahead of Vader in terms of raw power. However, this is where Vader's experience can make up some ground. Vader is undoubtedly more inclined to use grand-scale feats of telekinesis, and appears to be more willing than Jaina to simply unleash his power at his opponent until they are a crumpled heap on the floor. If Jaina's powers stopped at telekinesis, I likely would give the edge to Vader and move on. Unfortunately for Vader, Jaina has more at her disposal. As previously mentioned, Jaina does have access to Force Lightning, and this is a power that Vader is especially weak against. Her disinclination to use it could be a factor. However, her access to Shatterpoint is where the case is settled in my view. As always, during the Force verdict, neither combatant can use anything other than their Force abilities, which means that while Vader could normally block lightning with his lightsaber, he would be unable to do so in this case. Additionally, in such a scenario, Vader's electrical Shatterpoint would be so painfully obvious to Jaina that she would have to willfully ignore it in order for her to miss it, and so a Force duel between the two of them would only last as long as it took for Jaina to ready a kill shot of lightning. Jaina Solo gets the edge in Force abilities. Darth Vader wielded a lightsaber of similar design to Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber. Originally, it contained a red synthetic crystal as the focusing lens, though he later swapped it out with a rare red-hued Adegan crystal. Vader's lightsaber also possessed a dual-phase function. This allowed him to immediately change the blade length to preset lengths. Vader's armor and equipment remained the same as discussed in the physical abilities section. Jaina Solo wielded a standard Jedi lightsaber, powered by a violet synthetic crystal that provided no extra benefits beyond familiarity with her own handiwork. She also wore either standard Jedi robes or a black tactical suit. In either case, neither provided special benefits. Due to Vader's weapon providing him with more options in combat, Darth Vader gets the edge in weapons and equipment. And now, the verdict. For this fight, let's say it takes place in the Forests of Sojourn, with multiple loose objects of various sizes for the combatants to use. Additionally, let us assume that for the purpose of this fight, neither combatant recognizes the other, because one or both combatants recognizing each other would cause an uneven playing field. Additionally, neither combatant will have time to prepare for the battle, and the fight will start with both combatants in full view of each other. As a final tally for this matchup, I see the victor winning 6 times out of 10. This will be a description of one majority victory. Let us begin. The early fight would see neither Vader nor Jaina make any true headway. Vader rarely rushes headlong into a fight when he's dropped in cold, and so he would bide his time getting a feel for what sort of fighter Jaina was before he decided on his next move. Jaina would be on the offensive as per usual. She would be coming at Vader with a moderately cautious approach, careful that she did not overextend, but also not afraid to take the initiative and bring her power and skill set to bear. Vader's primary advantages of his technique were all usually late fight attributes, and Jaina's best chance would likely come by way of her Shatterpoint, which she would likely have to take some time to accurately ascertain what she was up against, and then exploit it. Therefore, neither will be given an early fight advantage as we move on to the mid-fight. The mid-fight will play out much the same as the early fight, except for adding force abilities. At this point, Vader would realize that overcoming Jaina with saber skills alone would either take too long or not be possible, and so he would integrate force abilities with his lightsaber sequences. This would certainly hinder Jaina, but it would only momentarily stall her offensive. Jaina has been shown to override the telekinetic power of people at her power level, and so it would not be out of the question for her to wrestle away any direct force attacks. Grand-scale sweeping waves would be the most dangerous to her, as they have the potential for the most damage to be caused. The mid-fight will likely be a major deciding factor in this fight, though perhaps not for the reason most would imagine. The key for Jaina will be if she starts looking for a shatter point or not. If she chooses to do so, then that will be her quickest path to victory. If not, that will be Vader's quickest path to victory. That being said, even if she does begin to look for a shatter point, that does not guarantee her victory. This also results in no edges being given for the mid-fight. Instead of describing the late fight, I'm going to move on to explaining my decision on the verdict. To begin with, I view Vader and Jaina as roughly equal in terms of overall skill level, with Vader at roughly tier 1.5 and Jaina at roughly tier 1. Though why I view them as equals are for different reasons entirely. Vader has masterful technical skill with the blade, and an incredibly intelligent fighting style to back it up. Vader also has a large pool of force reserves to back up his abilities and no reservations about using them. This, coupled with his superhuman physical capabilities, truly make him one of the greatest Sith Lords of all time. Jaina is in many ways the opposite. Instead of focusing on technical skill, she focuses on being the only one left standing when the dust settles. She hybridizes classical forms with both New Jedi Order and Mandalorian fighting styles to create her own personal style that aims to gut her opponent in the quickest and most efficient way possible. In terms of force abilities, she is ruthlessly practical, aiming to amp her fighting style with powerful hammer blows of telekinesis to pummel her enemy into submission and throw objects to throw them off balance, with her more unconventional abilities only adding to this effect. In their own ways, both Vader and Jaina are optimized to take down the other. Vader is a Jedi killer. He knows what he is up against, and he is not afraid to overwhelm his adversaries if they prove to be a threat. Jaina is a Sith killer. She has trained her whole life to hunt down opposing martial warlords and kill them where they stand. Vader's telekinesis is a good method of attacking Jaina, who rarely has someone of equal power to face down in combat. Jaina's highly unorthodox technique is perfectly suited to take down Vader's pattern-recognizing skill set. Therefore, the win conditions for Vader are quite simple. If he and Jaina take roughly equal damage throughout the fight and it drags on into a marathon duel, Vader wins. If he manages to force the fight into an hours-long slugging match, he wins. If Jaina fails to look for a shatter point, or looks for one but chooses not to exploit it, then Vader wins. That gets Vader up to 4 possible victories. Jaina's win conditions are also quite simple. If Jaina can use her unique skill set to exploit her advantages while minimizing Vader's, she wins. If she can ascertain a shatter point and exploit it, she wins. If she can manage to get her lightning past Vader's saber guard, she wins. And if Jaina can inflict sufficient damage on Vader's artificial limbs that render them inoperable, she wins. The last win condition is not entirely unprecedented, considering that disabling her opponent's limb by limb is how she took down Darth Vader in both of their duels. The last possible win condition for either combatant is a circumstantial victory. This condition is not awarded based purely on skills and feats, but rather when you put the whole package together. Who can make the most out of a given number of scenarios to come out on top? Vader is no slouch to picking up on opportunities, but in this area he falls behind Jaina somewhat. I have gone through each one of Vader's feats that were a direct result of him capitalizing on circumstantial advantages and emerging victorious. The closest I could find was his battle against the Jedi Enclave, where he managed to pull out a victory despite being disarmed and at the mercy of several Jedi. Unfortunately, this simply compares to what Jaina has accomplished, and she has time and again proven that even in the worst of scenarios, she can pull out a win based on her skill set and tactical viability alone. There are precisely two ways that I decide my verdicts. The first is if the winner is painfully obvious and it is an easy victory, as was the case with the finale of Season 1. The second is if the matchup gets close. If it does, I ask myself, if you had to bet all your money on one of the two combatants, who would you put your money on? And for this matchup, that question was even more narrow, as I asked, who would I be willing to bet all my money on pulling out the most circumstantial victories over the other, based off of entirely unpredictable battlefield opportunities? The answer to that question is Jaina Solo. Though I should make it painfully clear that if Jaina had been missing any one of her advantages, Vader wins. But the fact of the matter is that Jaina does have Shatterpoint, she does have lightning, she does have an unpredictable and personalized fighting style that is perfectly suited to go after Vader, and she has the power and the force to back it all up and top it all off. She fluidly integrates all of that together, with the end result being one of the most lethal fighting styles in galactic history. I declare Jedi Master Jaina Solo Fell, the Sword of the Jedi, the victor. Thank you all for watching this episode of the Versus series. I am looking forward to the weeks ahead to possibly get a bit back on track in terms of a schedule, though this is all tentative. The most important thing I would ask you all to remember is that it is difficult to ensure smooth scheduling with a current situation. That being said, please keep in mind that this is all my opinion. I realize that this probably is a controversial pick for a winner, but I hope I did well enough in explaining my verdict as to why I picked Jaina. Additionally, I would like to stress again that it was not so much that Jaina is better than Vader, but rather that everything she has is built to counter someone like Vader, which puts him at a severe disadvantage, though it is a testament to his skill set to how close this matchup came. That being said, feel free to leave comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future matchups in the comments down below. This is the Phoenix Exalt, signing out, and may the Force be with you always.